Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I am Martine Felton, and this is Martine's Musings. And today I have with me consciousness doula and author, the beautiful Lynnda Pollio. How you doing, Lynnda?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you doing today? No,
I'm wonderful. I'm wonderful. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. I forgot to ask you that.
it's actually Pollio, but I get all kinds of pronunciations, so I just accept whatever comes my way.
Okay.
No matter what name it is, so it's fine.
Okay. So, I wanted you as a guest on the show because I was so interested in your work and what you've done thus far and your book. So, first, I want to talk about a little bit about your background
Okay.
as to where you came from and how you became to be a consciousness doula. Tell me about that.
Well, it's been a long and winding road. Obviously, no one, grows up and says, I'm going to be a consciousness doula.
Hmm.
So it wasn't something that you plan on being. And actually, I think kind of chooses you over the years. I was a very spiritual child. I think probably the first things I remember wanting to be when I was about 5 years old was a nun and an artist. And I kind of neither became neither, but they're both sort of part of me. I'm very creative and I've always had a very strong spiritual bent. And as a child, I was very religious. I was raised Catholic, and as I got
Hmm.
older, I sort of more moved into um, the more spiritual realms, and not so much my Catholicness. But I still kind of hold all that heritage of my childhood with me, and so I was always that way.
Hmm.
I didn't really have any intention of moving in that direction. I was born in New Jersey, and I was raised. My father was an alcoholic, so it was a somewhat tumultuous family life. And I spent a lot of time in the woods. We lived in a small town that had woods in the backyard and farms in the front yard. So
Right.
I just ran with nature. So nature became a really important part of my life and kind of the way that I kind of got through a lot of my childhood. And I went to school and got out of school and realized I always wanted to live in New York. So I went to New York City. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I never really had that clear understanding that people do. I want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher or a nurse, but I knew that I was supposed to be doing something. I had this very strong sense of a calling in my life. I just didn't know what that calling was. Kind of went.
Right.
I had a very traditional path for quite a while. I was always interested in astrology and kind of spiritual things, but once I got out of my childhood, that I kind of left that behind me and kind of got into the mainstream
Yeah.
life.
The corporate.
America and just pedal to the metal. I'm here to make money and figure out what my career path is. And then I hadn't seen my father in 17 years, and I got a phone call that he had had a massive heart attack and he was dying. And my uncle wanted to know if I wanted to see him. So I said yes, and I drove to Pennsylvania about 2.5 hours, and I walked in. He was unconscious, and I had been beginning to study different kinds of energy work, therapeutic touch, Reiki, working with crystals. So I started doing some energy work on him,
Hmm.
and um, we. I left that day. I came back the next day. I kept coming back for about 2 weeks, and he came out of his coma in about 2 weeks, and he got out of the hospital in about another 2 weeks. And
Wow.
when we were working at the hospital, he just said, "I, want 1 year with you kids to make up for the childhood you had because, you're because of me." So I took care of him the last year of his life. The doctors could not understand how he was walking out of the hospital because he was
Right.
kind of put together with spit and glue when it came to his heart and his kidneys. But in that year, we kind of healed a lot of the old family wounds. My brothers and I, got to know him really more the man he was and not the father we needed. So
Right.
that was really helpful because we got to really understand, why he was the way he was. He had been orphaned as a child and ended up in an orphanage, and God knows what happened to him in those days. And
Hmm.
started drinking when he was very young. So I got to see, really why he became what he became, and really the person he was. And he was a really good-hearted man, and he did love us very much. So in that year, we sort of healed a lot of the family wounds, and my mother and him kind of got back together again just before he died. And I was with him when he passed. And when I was leaving the hospice where he was, there was a book on a bench, and it was an old book. It was called The Call of the Canyon, and it was by an author named Zane Grey. It was from the 1920s, and I just threw it in the back of my car and
What
drove
was
home.
the title?
The Call of the Canyon by Zane Grey.
Okay.
It's an old book. It's really interesting because it's a book about a woman from New York. It's set in right after World War I, and it's about a woman from New York who goes out to Sedona, which is where I am now, goes out to Sedona in search of her fiance who came back with sort of mental issues because of the war, and goes out to Sedona and goes out west to sort of try to find himself again. And she goes out looking for him. So it's this whole
Oh, okay.
journey of finding him, but in the process finding herself. So I threw the book in the back seat and sort of forgot about it. And about 3 days later, I heard a voice say, "Go to Sedona." And I had never been here before, but I'd heard about it. So we just decided to go. And about 3 weeks later, I was on a plane. I had nowhere to stay. I didn't know why I was going or how long I was going for. I brought the book with me. And when I got here, I got a flat tire outside the airport. I read the book that night, and it was basically about this woman from New York going to Sedona in search of herself, which is
Hmm.
kind of what happened to me.
Yes, exactly.
I ended up spending 5 months here the first time I was here, and I had all the mystical experiences. Sedona is a very mystical, magical place, and I had
Hmm.
all the mystical experiences, and a lot of my childhood spirituality kind of got resurfaced while I was here those first 5 months. So when I finally went back to New York, I knew I could not go back into the corporate environment, that I had to be participating in the world in a more meaningful way. And so I got involved in what was called, just beginning at the time, conscious business practices, which are companies that were trying to be better in the world, and work with their consumers in more meaningful ways. And they were creating organic companies and solar energy companies and wellness companies and things like that. So I got involved with that for a number of years. And in the process of doing a consulting job, one day I'm working on a project, and I heard a Southern Black woman's voice say to me, "It's not what happened to me that matters." And it was a very startling experience, obviously, for a lot of reasons. And I started writing down her words, and every day I would feel her presence again, and I would just start writing. And every time I felt her, she always picked up where she left off. So I never knew what I was writing until I started writing it. And over a 2-year period, I ended up channeling the first draft of the novel that became Trusting the Currents. And I never expected to publish it. I just felt like I had this sort of covenant with her to tell her story. And after the 2 years, I came back to Sedona the last 9 months of writing the book, because nature plays a huge role in the book. And all the experiences in the book that she experiences, I experienced coming here. And so she kind of brought me into her story. It was kind of like, as I created her, she created me. I became very influenced by her presence in my life. And I, came back to New York after that and put the book away for a year, because I said, this is crazy. I'm this like middle-aged white woman from New York writing a first-time spiritual novel about a family of Black people. I'm like, that's pretty weird. So I said, that's nuts. And I put it away. But she came back to me a year later and said, it's time to start editing. And it took me 8 years to edit the book, because I just kept giving up on it. And she kept coming back over and over again saying, you can do this. And I finally wrote it, and I self-published it. And at the time, 3 days before the book was going to come out, my mother fell and shattered her femur. And I went into 24/7 care of my mother for 9 years. And before that, right before that, I had taken a job, and I became the world's first chief consciousness officer. I was very involved in consciousness at that part, and in helping people understand what I call are the um, the human technologies of wisdom, intuition, compassion, empathy, forgiveness, and gratitude, because I felt like we were going to be going into a time that we were going to be needing to use those technologies to support ourselves, our families, and our communities. So I became very passionate about working with companies. So I did that, and then my mother fell, and I kind of went down a rabbit hole of caregiving for 9 years, and it was a very deep and dark night of the soul. I lost everything that I had at that point: my career, my finances, my health. But it was something that was kind of important for me to do for my mother because she had given us so much as children. And so I started working as a consciousness doula, basically helping companies become more conscious after that, and helping people who are interested in kind of looking at their life in a different way. I mean, I think many people now are beginning to look at life in very different ways, and they're beginning to wake up and go, "Oh, maybe life is not the way I thought it was going to be," and maybe I'm feeling different about things. Maybe I'm feeling different about my friends or my job or my relationship, and they're having this kind of heart-centered experience about wanting to do more in the world. So I made a commitment to get involved in helping those people, and I moved to Sedona in March of 2020, just as the pandemic was getting going. So I had no idea the pandemic was going to start, but I gave away 90% of everything I owned, left New York, and came here. And sort of the rest is history. I've been working as a consciousness doula, and working with a lot of different kinds of people and businesses that are trying to move the world into a more heart-centered place and a more conscious environment. And kind of that's where I am now.
Did you know, when you started writing the book, had you had experience prior to that in
Anyway,
channeling and
I had gotten what I would consider high knowledge my entire life. Like I would just know things. I would feel this experience of almost something dropping into me. And
Mhm,
sometimes it would be around other people. Like I'd be talking to a friend and they'd be talking to me about some guy, and I would understand the course of that relationship. So I would be getting high knowledge. I'd be getting things about other people, about the world, about where we're going in the world, information for myself.
right.
But I never really heard a voice before. That was the first time it was an actual voice. So it startled me, and it was such a different voice than mine that it wasn't like I could, you know, it was definitely not my voice. So I think that made it easier to hear because I would feel her as she would be approaching. It would be this kind of unusual feeling, and it was almost like I always felt it was an indigo blue. I'd always
Mhm,
see an indigo blue color, and then I try to feel her, and it was really uncomfortable in the beginning, getting going. Like every time she came, I had to kind of get comfortable in my own skin for a
yeah,
while, and then once it was little like hitting a current. I would hit this warm current, and then it would flow, and I would just write stream of consciousness, and we would usually write for 3 to 4 hours a day, and then
mhm,
she'd be gone. And even if I tried to write more, I couldn't write more. I'd always end up throwing it out because it really wasn't me writing; it was really her writing. I can take full credit for all the editing, but I can take zero credit for the original um, story that she gave me and the messages
mhm.
she was giving out in the story.
That's so fascinating. Why do you ever sit back and think why you were chosen for that, why she chose you to
Believe me, the whole time I was writing this, because
yeah.
I had no intention of being a writer. It wasn't like I was going to be an author anyway,
Mhm,
and it was not something I expected. So the whole time I was writing it, I asked her all the time, and basically what she told me was really two things. One is to show what two women that share the same compassionate spirit can accomplish when they come together, and two was to celebrate our differences. that,
Mhm.
I remember, like, and I read about this in the book, and this really came from her. She said that we're all just the same white light of God coming onto this pearl of a planet, and
Right.
it's in here that we scatter into all the colors of the universe, and that we're here to celebrate that, because where we come from and go back to, we're not that, we're not different. We're all part of this source.
Right.
Um, so I think that was part of it, and I had a lot of fear around it for a long time, and she found that very funny. She she found fear hysterical. She always laughed at me when I was the most afraid, and
Right.
but but she always, told me to have faith, and I did. She's probably been the most influential person in my life, and she never really existed in my real world, but
Do
she's
you
still
communicate with her still?
not the same way. I mean, I didn't hear her voice in the minute I wrote the last words of the book, and I didn't know I was writing the last words until I wrote the last words. And when
Mhm.
I wrote the last words, I knew I was done, and I felt her leave. And when I was a child, I used to find baby birds that fell out of nests, and I would raise them until they were able to fly away.
Mhm.
And when you raise a baby bird, they will fly away. First, they fly back to you because they have to eat, and then once they learn to feed themselves, um, they would stay in the. If I called, they would stay in the trees, but they would chirp to let me know that they were still there for a
Right.
while. Anyway. And that's how it came with her. Like, I never heard her voice again the same way, but I would feel her presence again. Mostly when I was afraid, I would feel kind of this humorous feeling that was her. But
Right.
I never heard her voice again. But I felt that she has been part of the process of this book, because it's really had a life of its own. I've never really been able to direct it in any meaningful way. It just goes where it wants to go and
Mhm.
who it wants to touch. And it's reached people of all races and ages and cultures and religions and genders, and it doesn't seem to matter. It's sort of a very sort of deep experience that people will have with the book, and it's won 13 literary awards, and it's been an Amazon
Wow.
bestseller in inspirational fiction, and the reviews on Amazon are gorgeous. I mean, people really get profoundly changed, and I've had a lot of mothers and teenage daughters read the book together, because there's a lot of it's really about strong black women. There's three strong black women that are the main
Mhm.
characters in the book, and it's really about self-respect and family love, and
Mhm.
um, yeah, so it's been really interesting. It's been a really interesting journey for me, and she's taught me a lot. And mothers and daughters who read the book, they have something to talk about. They talk
Yeah.
about what happens to the characters, and they talk about the messages and the morals that are part of the storyline. And then there's an energetic frequency embedded, which is why another reason why it took me 8 years to edit the book, because I don't think that happens very often.
Okay.
I work on one sentence for hours because it had to have a certain cadence to it when it was read. And I always tell people, when they read the book, if there's a certain paragraph or sentence that they really resonate with, to read it out loud, because I think there's a certain sound therapy embedded in it, but
Yeah.
there's a frequency embedded in it that brings the reader into their heart um, when they read it. And I find that people, we all store a lot of trauma in our hearts, and so that's why when a lot of people, when they go into their hearts, they're very uncomfortable. They don't want to be there. They because they feel too much, because they
Mhm.
feel the things that happened to them in their past, and they feel that even their ancestral trauma. There's a lot of ancestral trauma that we claim we that that we take on, that really doesn't have anything to do with us, but our ancestors had all this trauma, and it's in our genetic makeup. So
Yes.
we carry that, and so that's been a big part of, I think, the healing is helping people to get back into their hearts again, so that they allow love, and particularly
Mhm.
self. And the book ultimately is about love. It's about self love, family love, romantic love. And it's been, it's really about helping people back into that space again.
I feel like she helped you conquer fears too. Like she helped you.
She helped me in a lot of ways. I mean, she brought me into parts of myself that I wouldn't have gone on my own.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, she's been a guide. She's been a guide, even though I don't hear her anymore. I'm so influenced by her, and I always will think, and I always still talk to her when I'm having a difficult time. I don't really feel her in the same way either, but
Mm-hmm.
I still have a connection to her, and it's been very important to me. But yeah,
Yeah.
she's an amazing woman, and she's named Addie Mae. Her name is Addie Mae Aubrey, and
Mm-hmm.
Aubrey she gave me right away when I started writing the book. And she gave me the name of everyone else, and she gave me her last name, but she wouldn't give me her first name. So for a year, I kept changing the first name, and it never felt right. And it was the anniversary of the Birmingham church bombings that killed the four little girls in
Yeah.
1963. And I was watching the TV, and they had the photographs of the four little girls, and one of them was Hattie Mae Collins. Happens to me sometimes. I don't know.
Mm.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. I understand.
Occasionally this happens to me when I talk about her. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Particularly when I talk about Hattie Mae Collins, because as soon as I saw the photograph of Hattie Mae Collins, I'm like, oh my God, that's her name.
Mm-hmm.
So I named her Addie Mae, and I taped a photograph of Addie Mae Collins to my computer. And for the rest of the time I wrote the book, I wrote to Addie Mae Collins, and it was sort of my way of kind of giving her life. That was
Mm-hmm.
pretty, and, um, and so it's been like I've had this connection to those four little girls in a crazy way too because of that.
Yeah.
And it's all like it makes no sense, and I kind of understand that.
Yeah. I mean,
But
it makes no sense to people who just don't understand. That's
yeah, it's well, you have to go beyond our cultural conditioning. We've all
yes.
been culturally conditioned to believe things, and
Mm-hmm.
beliefs are not truth. Beliefs are things that make it easier for people around us to manage us. And
Right. Oh, that's so good. That is so good. Beliefs are not truths. That
very
rings so true for me. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
no, because we all lead our lives based on things we believe, and
Mm-hmm.
they're not true. And we were raised, we get programmed from very, very young. We're programmed in our families, we're programmed through our churches, we're programmed through our schools, we're programmed the companies we work with, the people that we call friends and lovers and husbands and wives. And so we're programmed in that kind of way, and we don't know who we are anymore. We don't
Mm-hmm.
lose that essence of our truest self because we get swallowed by belief systems. And it's only when you're able to kind of let go of those belief systems, and through whether you meditate, whether you have friends you can talk to about. But usually, when you start breaking away from your own belief systems, you start causing a lot of problems in your life because other people
Yeah.
don't want to be challenged. And
Yeah.
by challenging your own belief systems, you're actually challenging their belief systems very powerfully. Um,
Yes.
so it's not easy, and I understand that. But for me, there was no other way. And a lot of people now are beginning to question the belief system. What everyone is telling us outside of us. And
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of people that are telling us these things don't really care about us, and so we have to care about ourselves. And we've given up our power, particularly women. And I think particularly African American women. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's so hard. I mean, it's just been unfair and not even no basis in any reality. Just been pressed upon
Right.
everyone. So it's time that I think people start really getting to know themselves, because and be vulnerable. I'm a big.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I feel bad about crying, but I think it's really important that we allow vulnerability. We allow
Yeah.
vulnerability in ourselves, and we allow vulnerability in each other because we're these fragile little humans that are here for a blink of an eye. And the only thing that really makes us happy is love. And
Yeah,
yet
at the end of the day, right? And we think it's other things. We think it's money, we think it's a
stuff,
job or a big house or yes,
yeah,
stuff.
we think it's
But
stuff. That's because that's
it's
the way we're
it's
trained.
really yes, that's the way that we were conditioned to think. And I
So
kind of want to use that as a segue because I also wanted to talk about, you know, your spiritual awakening and spiritual awakening in general for all of us because I feel like you had this writing of this book, channeling this book helped you, in many different ways, but I also think it was like an awakening for you as well. Can you talk about your awakening journey?
I think awakening is a very complex and long journey. I mean, I think a lot of people in the spiritual community now. I mean, it's getting. When I started doing this work, I was the crazy person on the soapbox on the street corner talking about these days coming, and no one really understood any of this. The languaging, people didn't talk about consciousness and energy and spirituality, and but so my awakening started happening a long time ago, and it happens in levels, because if you were to go all the way in one level, you'd probably explode.
Right.
There's a lot that happens to you when you go through this. So the first thing usually is you start looking around at your life and you realize that it's not making you happy. And you start realizing that you want a different existence and you want more meaning in your life, and you may not want the same things that your friends want, and maybe you don't want the same relationship you're in. You want to be more honest, and you want to be more open, and you want to be more vulnerable. So you have to start pulling yourself away from people to a certain degree, and you have to start spending more time with yourself. It's really important. We live in this technological world where everything is external, and our inner universe is as expansive as our outer universe. But we spend all this time in our outer universe, which we know very little about besides what people are telling us, and
Right.
very little in our internal universe where everything we need and want um, resides, because who you truly are is inside of you. So for me, it was about spending time alone. I remember when I went through my first real awakening, and I would think my first, outside of my childhood, which was pretty wild, my first real awakening was when I came to Sedona. And I realized that I didn't want to go back to a corporate environment. I didn't want to just be about making money. I didn't want to have these superficial relationships with people that I could have a good time with, but that didn't really know me and I didn't really know them.
Right.
When I went back, and I started living on raw foods. I changed my diet. I wanted to live healthier, because the better you take care of your body, the better antenna you are for these
Mm-hmm.
issues that come in. So, I learned to, I left all processed foods behind, and I started eating healthier and moving my body more, and, sort of doing things that other people I knew were not doing. So it becomes solitary in the beginning, and a lot of people get scared because they feel so alone. But you almost have to go through that solitary space to find yourself, because you are beyond that solitary space. And when I got back from Sedona, I didn't want to do the things that my friends were all doing. So I literally basically disconnected from most of my friends. And I was alone for a while, and it was really a little, kind of, am I ever going to meet anybody again that I want to?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But
I
it was
can relate
better,
to that.
yeah, but it was better. Being in that space was better than just listening to the crap that I didn't want to listen to coming out of people's mouths anymore. I didn't want to. Remember I had one friend who was very critical of everything and everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Just couldn't listen to the toxics, the toxins coming out anymore. I became much more sensitive, become way sensitive to people.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I kind of got rid of friends and I was alone for a long time. But then eventually you kind of click into a whole nother level and you start meeting new people that resonate with you and that share your same journey. And, you start opening up, and you'll start reading books, and you'll start taking classes, and you'll start joining communities, and you just shift. It's really about making small shifts. It's not easy. I mean, I know a lot of spiritual work out there right now. It's like wham bang thank you man. Here are the 5 stages of doing something, and you're going to be enlightened.
Yeah, that's
Trust
bullshit.
me, it is not
That's
the way it
bullshit.
works. Not the way it works. The more you know, the one thing I've learned is the more you learn, the less you know.
Yeah.
Because what happens is your universe expands, your soul
Mm-hmm.
expands, your consciousness expands. Yes, it's easy to know everything when you know this much. But when you start opening your consciousness and you start moving yourself into what you don't know, you realize that is where the power is. That is where you are, and that is where you have to journey if you really want to get to know who you are and to find those other souls that are stumbling around the dark as well.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm really fascinated by what you're talking about, so I can understand how, talking about consciousness and how you help people and companies, and kind of teach them how to be more conscious.
Yeah, they have
And
to be ready.
I
Like they
could
have to be
see
ready.
why you would call yourself a consciousness doula, because it's like you're helping them birth
I'm
their
thinking, yeah.
consciousness. Yeah. I love that.
For me, like when I first became the chief consciousness officer, it was very important to me when I was trying to get companies to hire me. They thought I was completely nuts. And they said, well, why don't you call it like a chief culture officer or a chief purpose officer? And I
Hmm.
said, because you can't be a word that you can't say. Like
Yeah, this is the,
you have to incorporate consciousness into you. That has to be something you go, what is that? Like what is consciousness? And ultimately to me it's simply awareness. It's just that you become more
yeah,
aware. Like whatever you believe now because of a very narrow perspective you've had of life. And when you seek out a higher level of consciousness, you just all it is becoming more aware of things beyond. Like I've always thought of spirituality of what is just yet unseen. We just don't know it yet. We call it
hmm,
spirituality because we don't have the experience with it yet, but it's always been there. It's like radio waves. We didn't know what they were until we discovered them. So, and we found ways of using machinery to track them. But this sort of human technologies, our body is the hardware. We
yeah,
feel like the more work you do on your consciousness, the more intuitive you become, the wiser you become, the more you are able to see people. Maya Angelou, my favorite quote of all time is Maya Angelou's, when someone showed you themselves, believe them.
yep,
Because people always show you right in the beginning of a relationship, whether it's a friendship or a romantic relationship, who
who
they
they
are.
are.
But because we want them to be someone else, we
Yes,
see them as someone else. And then
yeah,
when they turn into be the person we thought they were in the beginning, we get all upset, like how dare you not tell me who you were? Well, they did. And so
you just didn't listen. You chose not to see it.
it's true. Like we project what we want in the world. And so consciousness just allows you to take personal responsibility for yourself. Like when I get angry at my husband, the first thing I say to myself is like, what is he showing me about myself? It doesn't mean I'm not angry.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean I still may blame him, but I
Right.
become aware and go, oh, okay, like I'm not really looking at this self. This is my trauma, and we all have tons of unconscious trauma inside of us.
Yeah.
It's not.
Consciousness is so varied. It's
It's
so varied. And
it's
I feel like, but the one thing that's for me, is that it all meets back at the heart.
Yep,
You know what I mean? It's all about the heart, and moving from your head to your heart.
that's true. That's true. And the heart is really. I mean, consciousness is a gigantic field, and it doesn't.
Mhm.
It's very neutral. It doesn't look at good and bad. It's just awareness. But
Yes.
as human beings, when we look at consciousness of the heart, it just makes life better. We can look at consciousness. We could be looking at aliens. That's consciousness, but
Hmm.
it's not going to be. It's not going to change our lives in any meaningful way. But when we move into our heart and we look at people, it's easy to look at people that we resonate with love and with caring, and you like them, and somehow you meet people and you like them automatically. And some people you meet and you don't even know why. You're like, ooh, and that's frequencies. You're working
Right.
when you begin working with frequencies, and consciousness is very much about understanding frequencies and heart frequencies. If you connect with someone who's also heart centered, you have an
Right.
immediate connection. But if you connect with someone who's not heart centered, you'll feel a dissonance. And it's not like they're bad, it's just that they're not at the same frequency. So,
Right. They're not at the same frequency. Yeah.
Venus, and I think this is a line in the book, I think. I'm just having a flashback now. Uh, what one line in the book is, to be, you have to be nicest to the meanest people because they need your kindness most of all.
um,
So
that's
if
so hard.
it's very hard
That's
because
so
we
hard.
mean pig people trigger our own trauma. But
Yes.
if you are clear of the trauma that they are projecting to you, you don't get affected by it. Like if they're like someone could say something to me that I don't think that I don't have any trigger to, they could
Hmm.
say it, and I'm like, okay, you have your opinion, and I'm just going to stay away from you. But I'm
Hmm.
triggered. But if they say something to me that I feel triggered by, I don't feel good about myself. Maybe it's true, or it's something I'm feeling is true. My self worth is not there. Then
Right.
that will trigger me, and then and that will be create and I'll feel bad, and then I may yell back at them, and it becomes this like that, and which is what they want
Hmm.
because people need to get toxins out of them. I always
Yeah.
say, if you have toxins in you, write them out instead of spitting them out at people.
Yeah.
Just
I do that. I do that. I journal.
yeah, it's a powerful tool.
That's one of my therapeutic practices.
Yeah, it's a very powerful tool, and you don't really know what it's doing for you. You can just write, and look at it like a month later, and you'd be surprised how much wisdom
Yes.
is in your own writing.
Hmm.
You don't
Yes.
need anyone else. It's everything we need is in us. We just don't know how to access it because we've never been taught. And all of our media and entertainment and government and everything, they don't want us to go inside because
No.
and we empower ourselves.
Yep.
So the inner universe is the next great exploration in our world, and it's begun. And I talk to a lot of different kinds of people who are doing all different kinds of work at that level. Rewiring the brain so that you can think differently about yourself and learning
Hmm.
how to get into deep spaces within yourself. Plant medicine is wonderful in the right context. It really helps
Yes. Yes, it
get
is.
through to aspects of yourself that might take years in normal therapy, but you have to be doing it properly. You have to be working with, other a good therapist or a good shaman. It can't be out in the woods with 50 people. It really needs to be done in a sacred way because plant
Yeah.
medicine is a gift to us from the earth.
Yep.
So you have to be grateful and work with it in a very sacred
Yeah.
way.
So
So
what are what are some of the practices that you do in terms of self-care and how you kind of put yourself first and do things for
well,
you?
I need alone time, number
Yeah.
one.
Hmm.
Number
Me too.
one, alone. Like,
That is,
no,
yeah, that is numero uno for me too.
number one. Like, just everyone leave me alone. And, I haven't been able to do this in a while, but, in my past, I'd be able to leave for like a month. Be back in a month, see you when I get back. And I would go and I would do, spiritual journey work, and I would do I would learn, I've studied different spiritual disciplines and energetic
Hmm.
and all kinds of things. So that was my thing. I would go deeper into learning about these things
Yeah.
because I wanted to know more about them, and I wanted to know how my life could be affected by them. So whatever that is, I mean, some people you want to learn how to play tennis. Who knows? Like whatever it is for you, that makes you feel like you're really caring for yourself, that's what's important. So I
So
think,
I'm going to wrap this up here. This was an amazing conversation about your book and about consciousness.
mhm.
Can you let everyone know where we can find your book?
Well, it's on all the sort of platforms, but Amazon's
Like
probably
Amazon and Barnes and Nobles?
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, iTunes, I think
Okay.
Kobo and other ones. But yeah, you can find it on all the major kind of book sites. Yeah.
Okay. So what I'll do is I will have a link in the description, a couple of links as to where people can get your book and direct them over to your website, have some information about what you yourself and what you do and things of that nature. I
Hmm.
want to thank you for coming onto the show and talking to me and my audience, and for everyone listening on the podcasting platforms. Thank you for listening. And if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe and like the video and even leave a comment. I love to hear feedback um, about, the show. So, everyone, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And I will see everyone at the next episode. Take care. Bye.